That woman doesn't know subtlety from a hole in the ground. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Read, share, repeat, where we discuss books from the perspective of an aspiring fantasy author. Me, Carrie Share. Well, today is sort of a throwback video because I am returning to a review series that I once called Behind the Bandwagon. And the idea behind this is that I took several years off from reading, pretty much from the time that I left high school up until 2018 or so. I was not actively reading. And as such, I feel like I missed out a lot of great books in the fantasy genre, which is of course my favorite to both read and write. And in an effort to familiarize myself with some titans of the genre, I decided I would intentionally seek out big name books in fantasy and sci-fi and read and review them. Now, to qualify for the Behind the Bandwagon review series, I have set a couple of stipulations to ensure they meet the spirit of the series. The first being that it must be at least 5 years old. And the next two are that it must have at least a 4-star rating on Goodreads with at least 100,000 reviews. Now that's kind of stringent, but I think it's an interesting way to look back at some very, very popular books and see if they would hold up with a fresh reader who is far removed from any sort of hype these books may have gotten around the time of their release. I will link the other Behind the Bandwagon reviews I have done in the past below. I haven't done too many of them and it's been a while, so I'm probably a little rusty. As always, the biggest disclaimer for any book review is to take this book review with a grain of salt. This is just one woman's opinion. Me not liking a book that you loved or really loving a book that you hated is not a values judgment on either of us. It just simply means we have different tastes. Just like I wouldn't judge you for liking chocolate ice cream while I prefer vanilla, it's not a comment on anyone who likes some books and doesn't like others. So if I share an opinion about a book that you love, please just remember it's my opinion. It has nothing to do with you as a person, and I hope you don't think it says anything about me as a person other than we just have different tastes. All of that to say, the book I will be reviewing today for today's Behind the Bandwagon is The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen. And if you've been following along on my channel, you'll already know that I wasn't a huge fan of this book. So if you did and you don't want to hear me slander it, now is your time to check out. Released on October 16th, 2018, The Bridge Kingdom is a new adult-ish. However you feel about that category, just know it kind of lies on the bridge, pun intended, between young adult and adult fantasy romance about a young woman named Laura who is given away in marriage as part of a treaty between her home nation and a country known as the Bridge Kingdom. And here, let me do just a quick preview of the rest of the review. I am going to get a little bit into spoilers. That's a lie. I'm going to get a bit into spoilers, but I also didn't take extensive notes. That is something I am trying to get better about so that I can be a more informed reviewer. I did take some, and I do have a pretty good memory. I only just finished it about a week ago, so I still have some of the details fresh in my mind. That being said, I will admit to skimming pretty heavily towards the end because I was just over it. So towards the end, I may get some details wrong, but the gist will be right. So proceed with caution, and I am more than happy to be corrected in the comments if I get a detail wrong. So as I mentioned, the majority of this book is set in the Bridge Kingdom, and what is unique about this fantasy landscape is that there are 2 major continents and a series of islands in between the 2 continents over which this massive, impressive bridge has been constructed, connecting the 2 continents together. And I believe the purpose of the bridge, or the necessity of the bridge, is because the ocean is not navigable for much of the year because of like some crazy storms. And so in order to trade with one another, this bridge is a necessity. However, some of these nations cannot completely care for themselves on their own without trade. And so it makes the nation that possesses the bridge extremely powerful. Wars have been fought over this bridge. Many, many thousands of people have died, and it has been a source of contention in this political landscape for as long as anyone can remember. Who built the bridge? How it was built? how it's maintained, what's it made out of. These are not questions that were important for us to know the answers to, so I cannot answer them for you. The bridge itself is just one of those things that you just have to accept and move on. It's not so much what the bridge is as the conflict it symbolizes. Some 15 years, I think, in the past, the Bridge Kingdom, and I've forgotten the names of the nations, I'm so sorry, they are just not that important for me to learn, formed an alliance with this desert-based kingdom on one of the continents. Not really an alliance so much as they formed a treaty, a peace treaty essentially, that in exchange for one of the princesses of this continent-based kingdom, the Bridge Kingdom will then facilitate trade better or something that will help them financially. And with trade and with goods so that their people have better lives. That's the idea. And that is the opening snapshot that we begin on. We meet Lara, who is one of 12 sisters who have been secretly sequestered in the desert and spent their entire lives training to be a spy and assassin who will eventually go on to marry this prince of the Bridge Kingdom and sabotage their nation in order for her home country to come in and seize control of the bridge. Lara's father arrives to make his selection of which of the sisters he thinks is the most adept and will perform her mission most adequately. However, Lara has deduced that her father intends on killing the remaining sisters to prevent the secret of their existence ever getting out, and the Bridge Kingdom ever learning that bride-to-be is actually an assassin. And Lara's brilliant plan in response to this is to just kill her sisters herself. Sort of. She does poison them to make her father think that she killed her sisters, but it's actually one of those slow-moving poisons where they will eventually come out of their stupor and be fine. And she leaves a note in one of her sister's pockets explaining that she only did that to protect them and that she would do what needs to be done in the Bridge Kingdom, yada, yada, yada. And I'm going to tell you right now, my immediate thought when I read this was, okay, but what if they don't believe her? Or what if they are pissed that she poisoned them, and then afterwards her father's men lit the entire the hideout that they were staying in on fire, so they were poisoned and slowly recovering and then waking up to a place that's on fire and not having anywhere to go and having to live in hiding. What if they're not exactly thrilled about that? What if you were wrong and your dad didn't intend to kill them? What if, anyway, I just felt that was a little bit ill thought out. This is important for later. So Lara goes with her dad to the port city, and on the way she is being fawned over by these starving children and being hailed as a savior because she will deliver the Bridge Kingdom or something. I don't know. So she is really entrenched in this belief that the Bridge Kingdom has their boot on the throat of everyone else by having this stranglehold on the trade, and that nations are starving, her nation in particular, are starving because they cannot get adequate supplies through the Bridge Kingdom in order to feed their country. There's been famine, there's been plague, there's been war, and her nation is suffering because of the Bridge Kingdom. That is something that has been instilled in her at birth. What also is the case is that she does not trust her father. She knew that immediately. She saw that he would want to kill any sisters that he did not pick to be the bride of the Prince of the Bridge Kingdom, and that he very much had ruthlessness in him in order to serve his ends. Again, that's important for later. She knows this about her father. In fact, in her own mind, she's telling herself that after she delivers the Bridge Kingdom, after she betrays her husband and finds a way to smuggle information on how to successfully attack the Bridge Kingdom out to her father, she is going to slip away and escape and go into hiding because she doesn't trust that her father will even keep her alive after this. Important for later. This is the setup. We've got Lara. She's been living in the desert for pretty much her whole life, training to be a spy, assassin, courtesan woman. Perfect, ideal bride for this man, the Prince of the Bridge Kingdom, but who can write in code and seduce people and, has no problems fighting and slitting throats and poisoning. She knows all about poisons, all this stuff. She's a perfect assassin and spy and wife. She leaves her poisoned potentially dying sisters in a burning structure in the middle of the desert, goes to meet her new husband, or the man who will be her new husband. And I don't know if this has bothered anyone else who read this book, but something bothered me about the fact that Lara and her sisters and her father all hail from a desert nation, and everyone there seems to be exclusively white and fair. Lara is white and blonde. I didn't love that. And then she referred to her father having harems. And so I was like, oh, okay, so this is very much explicitly referring to potentially Middle Eastern cultures in the real world, but everyone here is white. That made me uncomfortable, to say the least. I mean, on the one hand, as an aspiring fantasy author, I kind of get it. You don't want to write from a race that you cannot speak for, and you don't want to borrow from a real world culture that is not your own and then do it badly. I can kind of see why she was walking that line, but in that case, just don't make it a desert. The nation being a desert really didn't matter that much. It could have been literally any other sort of climate, and definitely didn't need to use real world associations with like Middle Eastern cultures like harems. There were other things too, but that was the one that stuck out as being like, oh, interesting. So we arrive at the port. Lara is taken by boat from the port capital of her nation to meet on one of the smaller islands of the Bridge Kingdom to meet and marry the prince of the Bridge Kingdom. His name is Aren, A-R-E-N, and begin her new life as a wife and spy. I went into this book with an open mind. In the first couple of chapters, I was like, this isn't the greatest, but I'm gonna see where it goes. And by the time we get to Aren's first chapter, I knew that this book and I were not gonna get along. First of all, I was really disappointed that this political marriage, the most important kingdom literally in the entire known world that we know of it, these two continents and the Bridge Kingdom, the most important figure in that kingdom, and a princess of another nation that is literally changing the landscape of politics throughout both of these continents and shaking up the alliances and all of that. And it's literally just a page long. She walks up, a priest says the vows or whatever. They do a little thing where they bind their hands together with ribbon or something, and then it's over with. And I'm just like, man, and this is probably just a me thing because I love political intrigue, but I was really hoping to see more of the politics of this marriage and seeing more involved in the actual wedding. And like I said, that was a red flag to me. This was not what I expected from reading the synopsis. I thought this was going to be a lot more of the political intrigue, what with Lara spying and trying to get information on her new home and leveraging her role as queen, both to seduce her husband and also to gain access to information she shouldn't. And it just ended up not being that. The political intrigue was extremely minor. So that was a little bit of a bummer. But also in that chapter, we get Aren's perspective. And when I describe this man as generic, I think that's being generous. Aren is a man without a personality or goals or any sort of ideas of his own beyond be good person. I wish he could say he had more going for him other than that, but that's it. That's all he had, is he was determined to be a good person. And so when Lara comes and marries him, everyone obviously on his side are suspicious because historically the Bridge Kingdom and Lara's kingdom have been at odds or actively at war. And even though this treaty is 10 or 15 years old, they're still not sure if she can be trusted, which, as we know, she cannot. And yet he's just she's just a girl and she didn't want this either, and I'm not going to be a brute to her, and all this stuff. And it's just immediately from that chapter where I could see from his perspective, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be the most boring romance I can imagine, because there's just no personality to this man. None. And Lara wasn't exactly giving me a lot of hope either, especially since we arrive at the palace, the main part of the Bridge Kingdom, where Lara and Aren as a married couple are down to make their home. There's also barracks there, but it's one of the central islands of this archipelago, and that's where they're going to live. They arrive. It's their first night there. Aren's sister, and now her name escapes me as well, is the captain of the guard at what is called Southwatch, which is one of the major lookout islands keeping an eye on the South continent. But she is staying with them, and she, wants to meet her new sister-in-law and kind of, establish things with her brother with this new marriage and everything, and kind of like get a lay of the land. So Laura, in her infinite wisdom, on her very first night, decides it would be a really great idea if she poisoned her new husband and her sister-in-law. Not fatally, but just enough to knock them out so she could go snooping. And I really wish I had DNF'd it right there, because, bitch, it is your first night and they are already suspicious of you. They basically roofied her to wipe her memory so she would forget everything she saw in the passage from the outlying island where she got married into the inner island, so that she would not have any information that she could pass back to her dad. They do not trust this bitch at all. At all. And you don't think that they are going to wake up and be like, I literally fell asleep at the dinner table. That's weird. I wonder if this new person we brought into the fold, who we already don't trust, and who comes from a country who has had historic tension with us, I wonder if those two things are related. I wonder. Well, it turns out she had nothing to worry about, because they don't wonder. She is able to drug them and then go into Aaron's personal chambers where he is sleeping currently and start rifling through his things. And I'm just like, it is your first day. It is your first day. This could not wait. You couldn't figure anything else out about where you're staying. You had to go and try this shit on your first day. Okay. He starts to wake up. She decides to distract him, or she decides to dose him again by putting a little bit more of the poison on her lips and then kissing him. So she gets all up on him, and he's all dazed because he's still under the effects of the drug. And she's being sexy on him, and he's like, oh, sexy times. And then she kisses him, and then he passes out again. In that moment, I was like, well, maybe this is a sexy book, which I was not opposed to. In fact, I was kind of hoping it would be, especially after that scene. And honestly, if it was a sexy book and there were just sex scenes all throughout the book, that would have been fine with me. I almost would have preferred it, because I already knew that the fantasy plot was going to be garbage. And if it was a sexy book and it was really spicy and had a really steamy romance going on, I could probably forgive the fantasy plot being trash. Well, that didn't happen either. So anyway, Laura doesn't get caught, because why would she? Totally makes sense. And Aaron's sister wakes up at the table and was like, oh, I must have drunk too much, even though I've literally never done that before. And everyone's like, that is weird for you. And nobody fucking questions it. It's just like, and this is where I realized that Danielle L. Jensen must think her readers are bottom of the barrel intelligence to think that any of this makes sense. But we persevere. From then on, my memory of the plot gets a little hazy, because it gets exceedingly boring. There are no spicy, sexy scenes to keep me interested throughout. Instead, Laura just spends every single day, which is still not very much time. I think the bulk of this book happens over the course of maybe a month, basically pretty much ignoring all of the guidance that Aaron and his people are saying. Hey, don't wander around, please stay within the palace confines, not just because we think you might be a spy, but also there are actual dangers on the island. This is a very kind of tropical archipelago. It is mentioned numerous times that there are deadly snakes. Well, she spends all of her time blatantly ignoring all of this advice and warnings, despite how suspicious this makes her. And even on the second day, when she's wandering around searching for the perimeter of the island outside of the palace, and she gets caught, Aaron is just like, hey, this seems suspicious. And she was just like, I was just looking at my new home. And he buys it, because I guess Aaron's other personality, other than be good person, is literally believe anything he is ever told. So she wanders around, she talks with various people inside the inner circle. One thing about Laura that Danielle L. Jensen really relied on to move her plot along is that she cannot swim, and she gets very seasick, and she is afraid of the water because she comes from a desert nation and never really had a chance to be on the water. Okay, fine, I get it. Really dumb, really dumb of her dad, who has a port city, to not teach his daughters, who he is specifically trained from birth to become the queen of an island nation, and not teach them how to swim. Okay, fine. So she sees the boat. She kind of spies and sees some of this island nation's defenses and kind of understands a little bit better why they are so impervious to attack. Not just because the waters around them are dangerous, but they have also spent hundreds of years adapting themselves from naval attack. And so she kind of sees this. I can't remember the impetus, but they decide to take her to a village on another island. And in order to do so, they have to take her on like a boat. Like a small not quite a dinghy, but I kind of imagine that in my mind, but I think more like a small sailboat maybe. I don't know. She freaks out because she's getting sick and she doesn't know how to swim. And part of her is like, no, I want to master this fear. But part of her is like, if I panic hard enough, maybe they'll take me over the bridge and I can kind of inspect the bridge and see if there's any weaknesses in the bridge that my father can exploit. And that works. So she panics. They take her onto the bridge. She does her little spying thing. At one point, the village that they visit is attacked by raiders, and Aaron and his soldiers are trying to fight off the raiders, but Lara is like, despite the fact that her cover is contingent on them not knowing that she can fight and that she can defend herself, they need to believe that she is just like a wilting flower. She's like, no problem, I'll just take this knife and go wade into the fight myself. And her logic in doing this is that she needs Aaron to live, because if he dies, there's nothing to stop his sister, who would ostensibly be in charge, from just kicking her out. And so she needs Aaron to live so she can remain on the island and figure out and do her spying thing. So she's like, oh, I gotta save him. So she goes in and she stabs some guy who was fighting Aaron, and everyone sees this, and instead of thinking, I thought you had no experience with any sort of combat or anything, they just go, oh, they saved our king. Oh, respect, trust, and respect. There's another raid. She inspects the bridge. She sees weaknesses. She figures out a way to mark a certain entry point on the bridge surreptitiously so that she can send a message to her father and he can invade at these points and it would be effective. She's just gathering all this information. That's really the middle 40% of this book is just her gathering information on where she's living. I wish I could say that the romance was developing, but it is developing in a way that you could only imagine with a beautiful woman and a man who is completely head empty would progress, in that he occasionally sees her doing nice things like playing games with the local village children or tending to the wounded and thinks, oh, she's such a good person. She can't possibly be anything other than what I see her to be. That's how the romance progresses. There's really not a lot to it. It is very generic and extremely boring. We get to about the 60% mark, and yet again, there's a raid, and Lara has been teaching herself like healing, or has been participating in the healing, so convinces Aaron to take her with him to go support the villagers and whatnot and supply troops to fight off the raid. In the course of that battle, she manages to save a bunch of additional soldiers by dragging them off the beach and into safety so that they could be tended to by the healers. And of course, again, everybody sees this and goes, oh, our queen, she's not truly a spy or someone we should hate because of where she came from. She's one of us now. She loves us. Afterwards, they return home and Aaron and Lara are talking about what happened, and Lara is starting to think, these are real people. These civilians, these villagers are the people that my father is going to slaughter when he invades. And dealing with how can I let my people starve, which she has been again told is true, that the Bridge Kingdom, by controlling trade to her nation, is letting her people starve. How can I let my people starve? But also, how can I be responsible for the slaughter of innocents, which will certainly occur. And while she is wrestling that, she's kind of talking with Aaron about what she's learned about from being on the islands and all of that, and how it's kind of changing her perspective. Over the course of that conversation, she has like this moment where she snaps and she's just like, no, I can't think about his people. I have to think about my people. I have to do what I was trained to do. And so they have this argument where she's like, no, you are responsible. Your nation is responsible for my people suffering. Whatever you're doing to protect your people, it doesn't give you the right to to put other people in danger or at risk or, impoverish them or whatever. And she storms off. And what does she do? She goes into Aaron's personal chambers where she uses his stationery to write in invisible ink everything that she's learned, everything that she's done to sabotage the Bridge Kingdom's defenses so that her father can invade, on every piece of stationery in his room. Now, listen, it says in there that it's 26 pages. She makes a note of how many? 26 pages. And she writes the same instructions in invisible ink on every single page. So that any time that if he were to send a letter to her father for any reason, they would check it for the invisible ink and see it. So even if he wrote to someone else, all of his stationery has the same exact information on it. So at some point, her father will also get the information. That's the logic here. My logic says that she's writing on 26 pages, and I can't imagine that this information is just a few words. It has to be very detailed. And I don't know about you guys, but I have longhand drafted an entire novel before, and I can write about 300 words by hand in maybe 20 minutes. So even if it was half that, we're still talking hours of work that she's spending in his personal chambers after an argument with him. And she doesn't get caught. And that was the moment I knew exactly what the ending would be. I knew from that exact moment how this was all going to play out. She was going to somehow realize that her father shouldn't have been trusted in the first place, that he was lying to her, that for whatever reason, her mission to sabotage the Bridge Kingdom would not actually save her people. She would confess to Aaron that she loved him and he would love her. They would have a sex scene. And then for some reason, Aaron would write the letter to her father, and then the invasion would come, and she would be responsible for it. The next morning after their argument, Aaron decides to take Lara on a little trip back home, undercover. Apparently, he has a pirate ship that he uses sometimes as cover to go and do a little spying of his own, and he poses as a smuggler. And so he visits the port nation where her father's palace is, and through a series of conversations with his contacts in the city, she is able to learn and hear that, oh no, her father is actually not trying to save her people from poverty and famine and plague. He actually just wants weapons so he can continue the other war that he has been waging for decades and decades with another political rival. And this somehow comes as a complete shock to her. Despite everything that she knew about him going into this mission, she is well and truly stunned by this turn of events. However, before they are able to leave, she is caught by her father's spy master. Big problem. They somehow manage to escape before she is arrested or taken into custody or whatever. They take her back onto the ship. They race back home. They sink the ship. And that is when Aaron confronts her about being a spy, because while they were in the city, she went to the palace. And they watched her go because they kind of had suspected all along that she might still have loyalty to her father. And so they followed her to the palace, but she didn't go in. She changed her mind and she left. So they were thinking, oh, she's going to go to her father and tell him everything that she's learned, but they saw that she changed her mind. And Aaron was like, okay, so yes, she was spying on us, but I think we may have changed her mind. So once they get back home, he confronts her. I know you're a spy. And she admits it. She tells him everything, all the propaganda that her father fed her about the state of their nation and how it was the Bridge Kingdom's fault. They had their boot on their necks and that they were responsible for the suffering of their people. And that obviously she can see now that the Bridge Kingdom and its citizens are really just trying to survive because they are constantly fielding tensions from both sides, and raiders, pirate raiders and whatnot, and constant hostility and tensions with all the kingdoms that they have relationships with. And she sees now that she was wrong. And you would think that now would be a really great time for her to confess that, yes, I was spying on you. And I almost went through with telling my father everything. And also I wrote instructions on how to invade your kingdom on all your stationery, so you probably shouldn't use any of it, definitely not to write to my father. And I think at one point, and you may correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm pretty sure Aaron asks her if there was anything else she wanted to tell him, and she says no. Because in her big brain, I'll just go back into his room when he's not paying attention and get rid of all the stationery. And he won't think that's suspicious, and I won't have to confess that I came even closer to selling him out. And what do you know? They go back to his room, they have sex. It's really boring. Then he gets up while she's sleeping and writes a letter to her father, basically saying, I can't even remember, but something about honoring the terms of their peace treaty still, even after whatever. I don't remember. Something compels him to write a letter to her father. Really what compelled him to write a letter to her father was that Danielle L. Jensen couldn't think of a legitimate reason to do it otherwise, and she needed this to happen for the plot. So he writes a letter, he sends it, and then while he's sleeping, she gets up and she counts the pages and is convinced somehow that she had the right number. I don't know. I don't think that was explained, but I think I was skimming at this point too, so please correct me if I'm wrong. She counts the pages in the beginning when she is writing out the instructions, and she counts them again when she is getting rid of them. And I can't remember if that number was the same, or if it was, if it's explained how she fucked that up so monumentally. But she destroys the stationery or whatever. And then here's where it gets weird. Because all of this occurred, everything that I just told you occurred over the course of like a month, maybe 2, I don't know, but a very, very short amount of time. And then we get this like time jump where Aaron takes her to like the most protected sanctuary of the Bridge Kingdom. It's like some inner island that has the best sort of protection. It's hidden. No one outside of the Bridge Kingdom or like really within their inner circle even knows where it is. And that's where their people retreat to during like the worst of the storm season, so that everyone is protected. That's where like this council, who also for some reason has a say in the Bridge Kingdom politics. We don't really get a great explanation about that either because they're not really important. So months later, they are weathering the storm, or they are going through the storm season. They're living through the storm season in this shelter. It's months and months and months. And meanwhile, Lara is just the happy queen. She's just attending to her people and happily just making love at night, and everything is roses, because why wouldn't it be? And then at the end of the storm season, they get word that there are attackers on the horizon. They go back to like the other palace that wasn't in this inner sanctuary, but it was still on a larger island, wherever they were at the beginning of the book. And then who should arrive and show up but one of Lara's sisters, and not just any of her sisters. The sister that they all knew, that the rest of them knew, her father was originally going to choose for this mission. She got poisoned with all of the rest of her sisters by Lara at the beginning of the book, but everyone knew that her father was going to choose her. And Lara thought that she was saving her by poisoning her and letting her go to lead her own life and not have to face this difficult mission, at the end of which she would also probably be murdered by their father. Well, what do you know? This girl who Lara always thought of as being so sweet turns out to be kind of a ruthless killer, which you would think was the reason her father chose her for this job. Her name was Marilyn, and it's just like, it struck me at the beginning of the book, and it struck me again at the end how white these girls are. Marilyn is like, you dumb bitch. I wanted this job. It was mine. I had always intended to fulfill my duty, and I went back to my father after you left us in the desert and begged for a chance to avenge the betrayal, because at this point he knows that she no longer works for him. And she tries to kill Aaron, and she tries to kill Lara, and I don't really remember what happened. Oh, I think she kidnaps Aaron or something. And then like there is also like a potential invasion because they are using the information that Lara had smuggled out on Aaron's stationery. And again, I was skimming, so I really don't remember. All I remember is at the very end, Aaron has been kidnapped and Lara comes back, and his sister is trying to rally to his rescue, and they're like, you bitch, you betrayed us. This is all your fault. And Lara's like, yeah, but you need my help to rescue him. And that's where the book ends. And look, I knew everything that was going to happen from about the 60% mark. Even really, I had inklings well before that even, all the way up until the end, and almost no beat was incorrect. I didn't predict Aaron getting kidnapped, though I guess that wasn't really that much of a surprise either. Having now read 2 books by Daniel L. Jensen, I know this one was an earlier work, but I read A Fate Inked in Blood last year, and what I have noticed is that that woman doesn't know subtlety from a hole in the ground. She cannot foreshadow with anything less than 6 cloves of garlic. Right? That's how heavy her hand is. And for that reason, I don't think that she is an author I will follow with any interest. I do think that A Fate Inked in Blood was better. The romance was definitely better. But her plot twists are not twists. And for that reason, I just don't think that she and I are going to get on. I don't think that I'm ever going to read a book by this author where I don't roll my eyes at how ridiculously obvious the endings are. Like I said, I know this is an earlier work, and I have seen improvement from this to A Fate Inked in Blood. Unfortunately, what I hoped would be a book where I could turn off my brain and just enjoy a spicy romance in a tense political setting, I didn't get any of that. The characters were boring. The setting had potential to be interesting, but she just paid it no heed at all. She was not interested in developing the politics or developing any sort of inner workings of what this kingdom would actually have to do or how it would have to navigate political situations. There was no interest in that. No real interest in developing any sort of useful character relationships. And I think all of that could be forgiven if the romance was just good. And it wasn't. It simply was not. And so if you're asking me the question, does the Bridge Kingdom hold up? I don't know that I could definitively say yes or no, because I think for me, and I wrote this in my notes, is that this is probably the last hope for me to enjoy romantasy. And I think it's pretty clear that I can't just turn my brain off and enjoy a romance in a fantasy setting, because so often, if it was just a romance in a fantasy setting, that would be interesting, but too often these authors are trying to make their fantasy settings interesting, but they're half-assing it. In an effort to make the fantasy setting interesting, they're half-assing the romance as well. And you just got to do something with your whole ass, okay? One or the other. This was just another one where they were both half-assed. And unfortunately, I didn't end up with a complete ass in the end. I just ended up with ass. I'm going to stop saying ass now. So, does it hold up? I think even if you're a romantasy fan, you could probably do better. I don't think this couple was especially interesting, and I can say that having read her other work where she did have an interesting couple, and having read other romantasies where at least the couple was interesting. That was not the case here. I do not especially think very much of the setting or the political flavor that she is trying to give this book. I don't think it holds up under scrutiny. I think if you're a romantasy fan, you probably already read it and made your own judgment. Or B, I think there's probably better ones out there. That being said, I was probably never going to like this. And I knew it from 6 or 7% that I was not going to get on with it. There are just things that are a bridge too far. And a boring ass, oh, I said ass again. A boring romance with boring characters and a plot that only made sense if you understood it was headed towards a specific ending, and a setting that didn't really get the time and attention it deserved to be fleshed out. It just ended up being a big, big miss for me. I will not be continuing with the series. I'm glad I read it, so now I can take it off my list of things I want to check out. And like I said, I'm not writing the author off entirely, even though I did think A Fate Inked in Blood had a lot of the same problems with the ending being very predictable, but at least her romance writing has matured. So those are my final thoughts on The Bridge Kingdom by Daniel L. Jensen. If you're curious, I ended up giving it a flat 2 stars. I'm just going to briefly read you my notes from my call pile. The characters were a 2. Aaron was generic. Laura was just actively dumb, and her decision to not tell Aaron about the tainted stationery when he gave her the chance and she Anyway, bad. Atmosphere, I gave 4. I said the jungle setting was kind of interesting. The writing, again, what I gave a 4, said it was fine. And I think I mean fine derogatory here, because line by line sentences to me were not egregiously bad, but like overall the product at the end was bad. And can you blame that entirely on writing, like in a call pile breakdown? I don't know. Plot, I gave a 1. Hated everything about it. Intrigue, I gave a 2. Crying over the lost potential. Logic, I also gave a 2. Nothing in this book made any sense. And enjoyment, I also gave a 2. That spicy scene at the beginning, which is what really gave me hope that we would get more sexy scenes, and ended up not getting it. I'm going to do my best to do better, to take more detailed notes, so that when I do sit down reviews like this, I can actually tell you more in depth my thoughts and feelings without going, I don't remember. I feel like I have a pretty good memory a lot of the time, but genuinely, I stopped reading closely at 50%. Yeah, it was about 50% that I stopped, that I just started letting my eyes glaze over, and I was just like, I was reading it, but I wasn't like going out of my way to completely comprehend it. And then by 60%, I was actively skimming. And when I actively skim, I just read the dialogue, and I can get the context clues from the dialogue. Or if I can tell something interesting has happened, I'll pick out a few paragraphs to read, but actively skimming for the last 40%. And that does it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I so appreciate you. If you like my content and want to support the channel, please like and subscribe, or consider leaving a comment below. What is in my next video? In my next video, I was going to do an Adventures with Annotating vlog, but the way things have worked out this month, I am actually going to do a new sort of reading vlog that I'm sort of tentatively calling Who Wore It Better, where I am reading 2 books that actually have a lot of buzzwords and keywords in common at the same time, and comparing which one I feel did it better. For that vlog, I am reading The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri and The Final Strife by Sarah L. Arifi. So that is what is going to come to you on Monday. I hope you look forward to it, and I will see you then. Bye.